In today's episode of Tales of the Lone Wolf, I'm going to be talking to you about the spiritual journey. I've talked a lot about the emotional and mental aspects the lone wolf travels, and so I'd like to focus this one on the spiritual path. You see, the path of the lone wolf is nothing but a spiritual path because they are seekers. They are seekers of truth, and they are seekers of new thought. There's nothing more that the lone wolf wants than to have an experience of enlightenment, to see things clearly, to see things as they really are. One of the greatest teachers on the spiritual path for many was Siddhartha, who came to be known as the Buddha. And from what I'm about to tell you, you can see how Siddhartha was also a lone wolf. If you tuned into episode 5, where the lone wolf will not be a conventional leader, you'll see how Siddhartha fits in to this description. And as you've heard in previous tales of the lone wolf, some of us were left orphans. And although Siddhartha wasn't quite an orphan, his mother died when he was only 5 days old. And it was his mother's younger sister who played a role in his upbringing, along with his father. And his father noticed how quickly Siddhartha was outgrowing his teachings and knew that he would soon need to follow his own path, as resistant as he was to let his son go. So Siddhartha married when he was 16. Lone wolves in the wild only live until they're 16. And back in the BCE times, you'd think people were not living too long either, but apparently he lived to be 80 years old. Then he didn't have his son until he was 29. The day after he was born, he left, cut his hair, and renunciated himself to live the ascetic life. It's a lifestyle where you remove all sensual pleasures for the purpose of spiritual enlightenment. It's seen as a way to purify the soul and see things as they really are without the disruption of material motivation. And in general, I'd say many lone wolves lead a somewhat ascetic lifestyle by embracing simplicity, minimalism, and they may very well choose to leave material possessions behind, leaving corporate jobs for freedom of entrepreneurialism, no longer being driven by capitalistic or materialistic ideals. The lone wolf is one who is on a specific mission that at the onset might not be clear to them, might be crazy to others. However, they know that this is the path that is leading them to something greater. As they've removed themselves from these distractions, this also allows them a sense of self-discipline, self-control, cultivating a sense of mindfulness in terms of what they are consuming, which is also why it is a solo path. What possessions are meaningful and what meaning they're getting from certain sensory pleasures. Remember, the lone wolf is prone to periods of addiction and maybe even a lifetime of addiction. So when they choose a specific ascetic lifestyle, abstinence is a key feature. So Siddhartha spent a lot of time in fasting modes and then in traveling modes. He wouldn't eat for several days, followed by a day of travel and then feasting. His self-discipline and focus was noticed, and he was offered half of a king's kingdom, but he refused it, noting that he was on a different path to becoming a Buddha instead. So he went on to study under a few teachers, but it didn't really bring him closer to his awakening. So he continued with his travels. So if you're familiar with the story of Siddhartha, he came from a pretty well-to-do family that had everything that he needed. But then these travels that he went on went to the extreme opposite. And I think it's true for a lot of us lone wolves that we tend to have an all or nothing way of living. Either we're fully in or we're fully out. There's no in between. But for Siddhartha, he was trying to find the middle path. And for many of us, that is what our purpose is to find the balance and to find the alignment with where our energy needs to live. So after 6 years of living this way, he realized the ascetic practices were not getting him closer to enlightenment or awakening either. He was actually criticized, but he continued, and he looked for signs that he was on the right path through dreams and within nature. I've always looked up the meaning of my dreams. I've even kept track of my dreams, and I have a dream journal. Dreams can sometimes act like oracles, They can be little indicators of maybe what's coming in the future or confirmation of what you're going through. So Siddhartha did use his dreams to determine if he was on the right path. And he also used his connection with nature. And this is when he sat under the Bodhi tree. This was the first tree that he sat under, and he decided he would sit under this tree until he reached a newly awakened state, which actually happened the first night that he sat under that tree. So he stayed under it for another week. And then the second week, he sat facing the tree. And on the third week, he created a walking meditation path. If you're seeking something different, like something that no one else has ever come to realize, then you're going to have to be doing something different, something that perhaps no one else has ever seen or thought of doing. And to see and witness, you might think that's kind of absurd or crazy. Like that person is losing their mind. Like, what would you think if you saw someone doing this today, sitting under a tree for a week straight, and then the next week sat for a week straight looking at the tree? He's getting thinner and not moving. And then the third week, carved a little walking path for themselves. You'd think you're going to have to call for help and get them into the psych ward. The spiritual journey is very much this way. It's hard to know if you're losing your mind or if you're actually waking up to a new reality, a new mind. He wasn't seen in this way, though. And by the fourth week, he went into a nearby hall that had been created for him. In the fifth week, he looked at a different tree, the banyan tree, and his enlightenment became even clearer. Here we see how nature truly does play an important role in our journey. We're not getting enlightened by being around other people. Instead, we're enlightened by what has been on the earth before humans even arrived. It's nature and the gifts of this earth that we're most meant to connect with. This just confirms the urge that the lone wolf has to be on their own, to experience nature, to experience the nature of our own nature within nature, to see things within nature that no one else has an eye for, that is here to give us insights and to confirm our intuitions. In the sixth week, Siddhartha sat by the Mukalinda tree. And the seventh week, he spent with the Rajayatana tree. And in the eighth week, he feasted on food that had been given to him as newly awakened. The outcome of all of this was for him to teach what he had learned. He wanted to teach this to mainstream, like the non-aesthetic people, but they just shook their heads at him. And it's interesting because it talks about these three hermit men that he approached that he wanted to teach. And those were the ones that shook their heads at him. So he found 5 ascetics to teach. And what he taught them essentially was the middle path, the 4 noble truths. And the 4 noble truths are 1, the truth of suffering, 2, the truth of the cause of suffering, 3, the truth to the end of suffering, and 4, the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. And this is really what enlightenment, in my opinion, is all about, is finding a way to walk your path without having to endure the suffering of this life anymore. Freedom and liberation from suffering. And the second truth, the cause of suffering, is desire, is wants, is having attachments. Holding on to things and people as possessions will also cause great suffering. And the truth to end that suffering is to remove desires, to remove wants, to remove attachment. What I've come to learn on my spiritual journey about suffering is that the end of suffering doesn't mean the end of struggles or challenges. It means the end of seeing struggles or challenges as a negative thing. Whatever happens to an enlightened one, they're indifferent about it. And not in a lackadaisical way, but in a way that honors the middle path. It's okay that's happening. Good. Let that happen. That's allowed to happen. And these are things that only can be learned through the spiritual path. Someone doesn't want a relationship with me anymore? Okay, I will allow that. Someone treats me in a harmful way? Well, to be honest with you, no one can really harm me. No one can truly bring harm to an enlightened one. Harm isn't perceived as it would be to someone who hasn't come to really embrace the Four Noble Truths. So Siddhartha instructed 60 disciples who then went on to teach others, telling them to all head off in different directions, take a different path, and carry on teaching more people. Inspire others to go their own way. Pass on their energy to those who are willing to hear it. This is not done with the intention or purpose to form a specific community. More so an interpersonal, independent, interdependent sense of community. Knowing that you're not alone in your new enlightened way of operating, even when no one else around you is sharing the same perspectives and insights. You know that there are other people out there who do. And that gives you a sense of community without the actual community in your space. I don't know why this is, but the spiritual community isn't like a church community, because to be spiritual is about oneness. And it's a oneness with everyone and everything, but more so a oneness with yourself. It's an inner knowing that we are all connected, whether or not we are in physical body connected. There are millions of people out there who are not speaking out about their spiritual paths, their spiritual experiences, their enlightenments, their insights, their differences in perspectives in viewing the world and their sense of oneness. But if only one in a few thousand do, then the other millions don't feel so alone. And that's the point. Not everybody can do what Siddhartha did. Not everybody can go through that journey and live that journey and teach that journey. Just because you have religion doesn't mean you have the path to enlightenment, because you don't need religion to find God. We learn that God lives in each and every one of us. We don't necessarily have a church of enlightened beings because we don't necessarily conform to a schedule of meeting times or places. And some of us are not interested in being amongst the masses. You don't have to join anything to be enlightened. I think the masses form as a way to find enlightenment. And once they do find it, they don't need to be part of the masses anymore. They figured it out. And now they carry on as a unit of one. The path to enlightenment is the way, finding your own way, your own path. You won't find enlightenment by following the path of someone else. Instead, you remain in a state of conformity, rigidity, and limited in your capacity for spiritual growth. Siddhartha eventually did get the opportunity to teach those 3 hermit brothers, and that turned into him teaching 1,000 of their friends and followers, which then opened him up to teach King Bimbisara and his 12 million followers. He was then offered Bamboo Grove, the first Buddhist monastery in the world. Again, this is just teaching. This is not being a leader. As I noted in the 3 reasons why I won't be a leader, is because people mistook being a teacher for a leader. Leading, in my opinion, is telling people what to do, controlling their actions and outcomes, governing, ruling. Teaching is telling people about what they can be, what they can do, and giving them the choice and encouraging them to come up with their own freedom of thought. It's expansive, whereas leadership can sometimes be restricting. Many spiritual teachers will say, you don't have to listen to me. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just here to give you a thought, and you can do with it what you want. Siddhartha had an inner conflict where he didn't feel like he belonged to the ascetic lifestyle, nor the Brahmin, which in Hinduism is someone of the highest class. He really had no one that he could relate to anymore. None of the beliefs were ones that he could share. He left home at a young age to find meaning. He met people on his journey, but more so, it was his time alone under those trees that brought him the most inner peace and enlightenment. He learned how to be free from desire, expectations, wants, greed. Each period of isolation that I've gone through has had its moments of deprivation, which I know is going to result in the next level that I can already feel coming. The experience before the experience. My current deprivation is love. Okay, let's not call it depriving myself of love because I'm actually full of love. I am love. So to ever say that I need love denies the truth of the love that exists within me. To choose your own path sounds empowering, but it can also be scary. We are biologically programmed to seek approval because acceptance equals survival. Don't be holding on to the narrative that you're the oddball, you're the outcast, you're someone who is disconnected and living a private reality. It's hard to overcome all those naysayers. The lone wolf is seeking alignment. So it might test and try a lot of different things. You will be looked down upon and shamed. And it is a lot of work to walk your own path because there is no map. No one else has gone this route before. No one else is there guiding you or showing you. And you will make mistakes. You will get overwhelmed. People will see you struggling to make it on your own. It leads you to be 100% responsible for yourself. You're building your self-confidence and your self-respect. It's hard to keep the faith in yourself when no one else has it in you. So a lot of the times videos like this that speak to people like you are reaffirming and confirming that indeed, oh, okay, they're doing it. They're talking about it. They're thinking the same things that I'm thinking. This must be okay. They look okay. They look normal. They look like they're having fun.